Hi class, this is Drew Stegall, and today we're going to be talking about persuasion. We've already gone over the formatting of a persuasive speech, but today we're going to go over on how to be persuasive. First, I'm going to recap what I've said about the persuasive speech. This speech is different because you could have the option of doing it digitally, kind of like what I'm doing now is through a recording. You could record and upload this speech. Okay, it still needs to be 5 to 7 minutes and still needs to have all of the same formatting as a regular speech, but you have the option to record yourself this time. If you choose to do that, you need to upload it in the correct format, just like what we talked about with a .pdf format. And there's only one format that really works with the Brightspace and with the technology that I have, and it is using a format called .mp4. So if you have an Android phone or a Google Chrome laptop, that's what it records in automatically, is the .mp4. If you have an Apple phone or a Mac computer, it records in a .mov format, and I can't look at those. So if you upload one of those, I can't watch it, and I won't be able to see it, and I'd have to make you do the speech in person anyway. So if you do it, record on an Apple phone, please convert it. There's lots of converters out there. Please Google how to do that into a .mp4. Okay, pretty simple. I also want to remind you guys that even if you do record yourself and post it, we are still going to watch it in front of the whole class. So keep that in mind. It is optional. I encourage you guys to do this because during the COVID pandemic, we realized just how important digital communication is. I've seen court cases where lawyers who are really good at speaking, all of a sudden they're fumbling. They don't know what to do. And it's because they couldn't deal with talking into a computer. It's very different. So what I've done to actually kind of help myself is I have two little googly eyes. Here, I'm going to show you right here and here. And that helps me make eye contact with the camera because otherwise it's hard. A lot of times I want to look over at myself over here in the little window. So it's difficult. So we encourage you to practice it here because another pandemic could happen, or World War III. So you'd never know. So it's an option. What's nice about it is you get to record and record and record until you get it right, until you get it perfect. And as soon as you get it perfect, you can submit it. And this is probably the easiest way to get a 100 for this speech, for any speech here, is to just keep doing it until you get the perfect video. So there's just the recap. Second, we're going to go over persuasion and how to be persuasive. Persuasion is trying to get someone to change their actions or beliefs. It goes like this. People have innate values. Okay, that could be, I value relationships. I value freedom. I value making people feel happy, right? So let's pick on freedom. I value freedom. I value it so much, whereas Americans, we value freedom. It's like, yeah, freedom. And then we come up with, and that changes our beliefs. So it goes from values into beliefs into action. So I value freedom. And so whenever it comes time to vote, I choose to vote for things that give us more freedom. So there's let's see, I think the big thing right now as far as freedom goes is the legalization of drugs, of especially marijuana. Let's just pick on that. I don't really go either way with that. I have other values that are more important than this, but I'm just going to pick on that today. So because I value freedom, that means I believe that the government shouldn't be telling me what to do at all. Okay, so I value freedom, so I believe the government shouldn't tell me what to do, and that's going to cause me to vote in a certain way. That changes my actions of how I vote. So it goes values, beliefs, actions. Okay, so I value freedom. That means I believe the government shouldn't tell me what to do at all. If I want to not wear a seatbelt, it's my own car. Why do I have to wear a seatbelt, right? But then let's come up with something that would fight that. So if I truly value freedom over safety, so does that mean people are free to come into my backyard? Does that mean people are free to speed in a school zone? So that gets me to question my values, which then changes my beliefs. Is like, is it okay for people to just run into a school without being stopped or checked? And then that would change how I vote. So in persuasion, you're aiming to change people's actions and beliefs. Okay. So we do that through three main methods. Okay. And those methods are ethos, logos, and pathos. I call them the three musketeers: ethos, logos, and pathos. Let's start off with ethos. Ethos is essentially credibility. It's Latin. It's the correct term is appeal to credibility. So that means, let's see here. If I'm trying to sell you something on TV, like a drug, let's do a drug, and I come out, I'm wearing a white overcoat and I have a stethoscope around me, you're going to assume that I'm a doctor. And then I'm going to be telling you about this drug. It's like, you should take once a day Cialis because it's good for you. It'll make you feel 1,000 times better. But a lot of times on those commercials, you'll read at the bottom, not a real doctor, right? They pay actors instead. So ethos is credibility. If you're trying to convince someone, you need to be sure that they understand that you know what you're talking about. You want to be credible. So I'm credible in teaching you this because I have a master's degree from West Texas A&M University. I worked really hard. I've taken multiple classes on persuasion. And so I'm credible because I have a master's degree. I walk around on speech days. I wear my WT hat and my WT shirt and my WT boots. And that just goes to show, it's like, hey, I went to a university to learn what I'm talking about. So that's my credibility. So doctors have credibility because they've also went to school. Let's see. Let's go over the different kinds of credibility, because you want people to say, hey, they know exactly what they're talking about. So there's three kinds of credibility. First, there's initial credibility. That is initial meaning instant, the first thing you see, okay? So if you're watching TV and a doctor comes on, he has the stethoscope, he has the white smocks, the initial credibility is like, hey, he probably knows what he's talking about. He looks like a doctor. I'm going to trust what he has to say. I work with a lot of dairies, a lot of ranches, and I drive a milk truck every Thursday, and I have to talk with the organization owners, and it's a multi-million-dollar company. And if I go up there and I'm wearing my shiniest boots and a whole like suit and tie and all of that, I probably won't get a lot of initial credibility because it looks like I'm not a hard worker. So whenever I go to dairies, I wear my work boots. I wear my work clothes because I'm working, doing a lot of dirty work. But whenever I go to shake hands with these dairy owners, they look at my boots and they say, oh man, he's working. And in Texas, really, you look at a person's shoes. You need to look at what they're wearing, and is it credible? Whenever you go to a job interview, the first thing people see about you and know about you is what you're wearing. So in job interviews, you are persuading the organization, you're persuading the people hiring you to hire you because you want the job. So this initial credibility, a lot of times, is what you're wearing. We had a nursery worker, or a potential nursery worker, apply to work at our church nursery, and she came in wearing her pajamas. It was Cookie Monster pajamas. Her hair was poof, a mess. And this was the first impression. And we are hiring people to watch our kids and our babies. We want people, if they can't hardly take care of themselves, how are we going to expect them to take care of our kids? So that's initial credibility. Second is derived credibility. So that's the next step. It's like when you're thinking, it's like, hey, do they really know what they're talking about? So let's pick on the doctor again in the commercials. So we see a doctor and we're like, okay, he's making a lot of sense. He's using a lot of big words, but then you go to read the tiny words, you begin to actually hear what he's saying and understand it. You're like, oh wait, he's not a real doctor. Maybe I shouldn't be hearing what he says. One of my favorite examples of this is Morgan Freeman did a commercial during the pandemic, and he was talking about vaccines. And I was like, oh man, Morgan Freeman's talking about vaccines. this is important information. I got to really tune in because he knows what he's talking about. And we think that because Morgan Freeman played God in multiple movies, several movies, Morgan Freeman played God himself. Hi, I'm Morgan Freeman. And so he has that initial credibility that, oh man, in our heads, it's like, I think he knows what he's talking about. He's got that really good deep voice. But then as you really think about it, and as you derive credibility, you're like, wait, what on earth does Morgan Freeman know about vaccines? He's a movie actor. Did he go to school to study about vaccines? And the answer is a lot of time is no. So initial credibility is hard to change, but you got to learn as you are being persuaded, do people actually have the credibility that they're talking about? And that is derive credibility. That's the second step. It's where you actually start to think about it. So the lady who came in her pajamas, she could have been a 5-star nanny who just had a bad day. But it was so hard to get to that derived credibility because of her initial look. We couldn't even finish the interview because we're so distracted by her clothes. So you have to have a good initial credibility through what you wear, through how you carry yourself. You have to have good posture. If you're slumping in, if you are mumbling or stuttering, or if you're fidgeting a lot, that says, hey, you're nervous, you're scared, you're not confident. If you're not confident in what you're talking about, how can we be confident in what you're selling? In persuasion, you are selling us an idea, or you're selling a product, or you're selling yourself. So you are selling it, and if you're not confident, how can we be confident in it as well? And that leads us to final, which is terminal credibility. Terminal, familiar word here, sounds like death. It means forever credibility. Okay. Let's see, someone who used to have good terminal credibility. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Terminal credibility means it lasts. So once the conversation's over, what do you think about them? Okay, so it could be that, hey, he was a really stand-up guy. He had a good handshake. He had good points that he was talking about. I'm going to trust what he has to say. Credibility is built over time. You get some at the beginning, but it's really interest. Like you get it like at a bank, you keep building on and stacking on, and it keeps adding up. So terminal credibility is lasting credibility. Like once you're done talking, am I still finding you credible? So one thing about credibility, it's like at a bank. You could have, it's credit at a bank. Okay, you could have good credit, you could have bad credit, or you could have no credit. Someone who has good credit right now, trying to think, I used to say celebrities, but they don't. There's hardly any that have good credit. Let's just pick on Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We trust what he has to say. He's got better credibility than most. Okay. Now, someone who's got bad credibility, especially right now, is Will Smith. After the whole deal with Chris Rock, I've seen people say, hey, I'm not watching any of his movies. I've lost so much respect for Will Smith, and he had a lot of good credibility. Now he's got bad credibility. It's like, I'm going to trust him to do dumb stuff. Okay. And then there's people with no credibility at all. It just means you haven't gotten to know them. They haven't really talked about themselves that much. So it's not that it's good credibility. It's not that it's bad. It's just that there's no credibility. So if you go to a bank and you don't have any credit, you can't buy a house. They're not going to give you any loans. If you have good credit, they're going to give you extra money. They're going to help you out as much as they can. But if you have bad credit, they're like, ooh, you're not going to get any help either. So it's better to have no credit than bad credit, but it's always better to have good credibility. Credibility is built on common ground. An example of this is Harvard. Okay, we know Harvard. We know by name. It's a household name. Everyone knows that if you get a degree from Harvard, they know what they're talking about. It's common ground because we know about it. But if I said, I'm just picking it, I went to Colorado State University, or like maybe Phoenix University. In case you guys don't know, Phoenix University is an online only school where you pick your own hours. A lot of people don't know about those universities. So the better a name has, the easier it is to develop credibility. So in the Panhandle, we know West Texas A&M University. We know it's the local university here in the Panhandle. So people in the Panhandle are like, oh, WT, that's a good school. However, if I move to Colorado, WT University doesn't have as much weight because it's not a big school in Texas and people don't hear about it as much. Okay, common ground. As you are talking to bosses, when you're trying to persuade a job employer to give you the job, it's best to see what your common ground is with that employer. Let's see. So a lot of times it's like, hey, for me personally, it's like, do you know Pastor Terry Stegall? Oh, I am so close with my dad, Pastor Terry Stegall. And most people in Dalhart go, oh, I love Pastor Terry Stegall. He's got good credibility. And you're his son? You have a good relationship with him? Well, that's some good credibility right there just for you. It's developing common ground. So something here that I've done personally is work at United. I worked there and I worked there for 3 years. And whenever I was applying for other jobs here in the Panhandle, they're like, wow, you worked at United? Because they used to have a really high standard for sackers and checkers. And I'm like, wow, I know Andy runs a tight ship, so you must be a hard worker. So there's some credibility there. There's also bad common ground. I had a bunch of knucklehead friends, and some employers would say, do you know this knucklehead? Do you hang out with him a lot? I'm like, not really, because it's who you associate with. A lot of times it's creating a network. You want to create a network of people to build trust. So you're going to get that in university a lot. I have those teachers in university, they've been there for years and years and years. And whenever I go into an academic setting, even to get this job, I said, hey, do you know so-and-so from WT? I was one of her favorite students. And that just builds credibility. It's like, oh, you know this person and they liked you. And then my boss now, Miss Eileen Walton, she called him up and said, hey, is this true that Drew was a good student at your class? And they caught up a little bit, and it's just common ground, and it builds credibility the more people you know. Now, if you don't have any common ground, you're kind of a lone wolf. That also goes like, ooh, maybe you were homeschooled like I was, and like, oh, he's not really out there yet, but you could have a lot of bad credibility through common ground where you hang around with a lot of knuckleheads. So develop a network, get a lot of common ground. You do that through your experiences, through your classes, through your after school activities, through the friends you hang out with. They could be good or bad, but that's how you develop common ground, and that's how you build connections, and that builds credibility. Credibility, which is ethos. Ethos is appeal to credibility. It means you know what you're talking about. You know how to get the job done, and so we're going to trust you. And that goes along with evidence. If you come in and you're talking about, let's pick on one, not vaping, I would like some evidence that you're not just making stuff up. That's why for the persuasive speech, you have to have one source. So if you're doing vaping, go to truth.com. They have a lot of good sources. And I say, hey, but you could, 97% of statistics are all made up, including that one. You could just make stuff up. And if you are making stuff up, we want to hear sources. We want to have evidence that what you're doing is working. Or like for vaping, we don't want to hear, oh, I believe vaping's bad for you. We want to hear proof and evidence, like, oh, it really has aluminum. Well, how much? It kills how many people a year? How many 3rd and 4th graders are vaping in bathrooms? We need some evidence. So we require one source. Logos. This is a pretty simple one. This is also Latin. It stands for logic. Logos is appeal to logic. It is reasoning. Okay. Your arguments, the way you're selling, it needs to make sense. 2 + 2 has to equal 4, right? If you're trying to convince me that 2 + 2 = 5, I'm not gonna want to listen to what you have to say because it doesn't make sense. So you need to have some logical reasoning. A good persuasive speech has all 3 of these components, and you need to be credible, and you need to have good reasoning. Okay. Let's see. Recycling. Someone said that their topic was protecting the earth and recycling. And so you could, if you can't say, oh yeah, our solution is going to be to blast trash out into space because that will solve all of our issues. You need to have kind of a step-by-step, like what makes this a reasonable thing? Why do we need to recycle? Because the land is pretty big. I don't know if you walked around, you're from Texline, Dalhart, Borger. I mean, you go around the panel, there's tons of space. Why can't I just throw my trash out? It needs to have a good reason. And you do that through some evidence, through some statistics. And your arguments need to make sense. The opposite of sense making is called fallacy. It's a logical fallacy. So there's lots of these. I'm going to go over a couple of them. I encourage you guys to Google it later about logical fallacies. There's like 50 of them, but we're really going to go over 3. A logical fallacy is things that sound like it would make sense, but in reality, it does not. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 examples of logical fallacies. Oh. One logical fallacy is called ad hominem. That's important. Write it down. Ad hominem. It means you're attacking the other person's character. We had a debate. It was a presidential debate in 2016. It was Donald Trump. And he wouldn't attack the points people were making. He just attacked the people themselves. Ad hominem is attacking the other person and not their argument. It would be like this. He would call people a bunch of names. He called one person Pocahontas. He called Joe Biden Sleepy Joe Biden. It's like this. If you're like trying to make a point, you're like, yeah, you should not listen to this guy because he's got stinky breath. And you can't trust people with stinky breath because they have stinky breath. It doesn't make sense. So if someone's saying you should vape, it tastes good, it relaxes you, it's amazing, it's like you shouldn't trust them. They have bad breath from vaping. Don't trust people with bad breath. That's ad hominem. It attacks character. A lot of people attacked Trump for being a tangerine, for having tiny hands. And as people are like, oh, dude, what? He does look kind of funny. That's a logical fallacy. Ad hominem is to attack someone's person and not their argument. Let's see. Number 2 is called a red herring. It comes from a stream. You're trying to catch a good fish, and then all of a sudden, poof, a red herring comes through, and all of a sudden you're looking at the red herring that went flying through instead of the fish you're actually trying to catch. In arguing, in persuasion, a red herring is like, oh, do you know what? You make really good points, and then you change the subject completely to something different that wasn't even related at all. We see this a lot. In fact, we saw this recently. If you're looking, they're trying to get a new Supreme Court justice, and so they have to do a lot of interviews. And so they would be talking about race. They were talking about critical race theory and being taught in schools, and then all of a sudden, one senator goes, "Oh yeah, well, did you see this book? This one book?" And it says that babies are racist. Do you believe babies are racist? And the whole courtroom, the whole area is like, whoa, we weren't even talking about that. It's a red herring. It changes the subject fast to get people knocked off their feet. And it's a fallacy because it doesn't argue the main points. Finally, slippery slope. You need to write these 3 down. Ad hominem, red herring, slippery slope. Slippery slope is a fun one. I've seen it a lot. I think my favorite one was a Dish commercial for Dish Internet. They said, man, if you have slow internet, it's going to cause you to get angry whenever it buffers. If you're playing a video game like Fortnite, you're about to go in for the kill and then freeze. The buffering, it's going to cause you to get angry. You're going to get rage. You're going to get so mad, you could throw your gaming console, your controller out the window. You bust the window, and guess what? It hit someone in the head. And then all of a sudden, that person's mad, and they're banging on your door saying, is this your controller? And then you're already angry, and they're angry, and you start fighting. You fight, and then bam, you pop him, he falls down, busts his head, he's dead. And because he's dead, you're now on the run for murder. You're running, you get all dirty in the swamp, and you get arrested. You get to court, and you're just still mad because of the slow internet, and you get thrown to life in prison because of slow internet. If you don't want to be thrown in jail for the rest of your life, you need to upgrade the dish right now so you don't have slow internet and you won't end up in jail. Okay, that's an example. Slippery slope says that it goes from point A to point D real fast and without any real connections in between. It's a lot of what ifs, could be's, maybes. So with the vaping argument, it's like, if you vape, you're gonna want to go to the bathroom all the time. And if you go to the bathroom all the time, then you're not gonna be able to focus in school. And then you're gonna flunk out of school. And then you won't be able to get a good job. And then guess what? You're gonna turn to the harder stuff like weed and then cocaine. And then you're gonna be a drug addict, all because you vaped. Slippery slope. Goes from point A to point D really fast without a lot of connections. So let's go over the logical fallacies one more time. Ad hominem is attacking character. Red herring is changing the subject entirely to distract. And third is slippery slope, going from point A to point D with little to no real connections in between. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully I have good logos right here. So you're arguing, your persuasive speeches need to make sense. It needs to have good reasoning, and it needs to not have logical fallacies. Finally, a good persuasive speech has to have pathos. Pathos is appeal to emotion. So back in the old days, before lawyers, it was ancient Greek. If someone had an issue, they would go to court, and instead of having lawyers, they'd have to represent themselves. And Aristotle, who was watching this, he was a philosopher, he was watching, he noticed that some people were actually in the wrong, but because they were a good speaker, because they were able to talk with emotion, they would actually win the court cases. That's why a lot of times today, the best lawyers are good speakers. They can talk with a lot of emotion. And so even if the person's wrong, they still get off because they are able to talk with emotion. So this is the one thing I really hate about persuasion and about human communication is you have to talk with emotion. Otherwise, people aren't going to listen. People want to connect with you on a human level, and I want to connect with you like you're a robot. Okay, so pathos is appeal to emotion. Here's an example. I had to give a persuasive speech in college, and every student put in a quarter, and there's about 40 students, and every student put in a quarter, and then at the end of everyone's speeches, the person with the most persuasive speech got to keep all of the quarters. So my persuasive speech was to adopt a puppy dog. It was an awful persuasive speech. It had no credibility. It had no logos. It was just me showing pictures of cute dogs. So I actually made like an 82 on it. Like I did not make a good grade, and I was normally an A student. But when it came time to vote, everyone voted for me because I appealed to their emotion. I appealed to their emotion, and I won all of the quarters, like $5. But I won it, and I got to go out, get a nice Starbucks drink and snack afterwards because I appealed to their emotion. People do not want to listen to robots. If you go up and you sound like a robot, you should recycle because bleh. You should not vape because it is bad. You want to have emotion. That's why in my example of decriminalizing drugs and me talking about my uncle, I wanted to persuade you. So I talked about a personal story. It's like, hey, I'm personally affected by it. It affected my uncle. You need to talk with emotion. People need to have pathos in order to create a connection. It would be nice if we had robot lawyers and robot doctors, but I had a doctor and he did a fantastic job, but he was kind of rude. He went in, he did the job, and he would leave. He would answer a bunch of questions like, I'm a doctor. We call that having bad bedside manners. And we didn't want to keep going to him because he felt rude. But if you really think about it, he did the job and he did it perfectly. So why would we care if he was emotionally connected to us? That's just how humans operate. So your speeches, your persuasive speeches, and whenever you're persuading people at job interviews, whenever you're you are trying to convince anyone of anything, even if you're arguing with your siblings or cousins or parents. Good arguments need to have these three things. You need to have ethos, which is credibility. You need to have logos or logic, which means you need to make sense. And finally, you need to have pathos. You need to speak with emotion. Okay, that's all we have for today. I hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye.